Welcome to the Magic and Folklore panel with Gillian St. Kevern, Indy Grimm, Anne Barwell, and Elizabeth Noble.
Hi, I'm Elizabeth Noble, and I write sci-fi, urban fantasy, paranormal, urban fantasy and paranormal thrillers, paranormal romance, mystery suspense, and the occasional sweet romance, BDSM, erotic thriller. And Anne and I did a series, a paranormal series, The Sleepless City.
Yep, since you and Anne wrote together, it makes sense to go to Anne next.
Right, thanks, Jillian. I'm Anne. I'm from Wellington in New Zealand. I write across a few genres, as Elizabeth has said. We co-wrote a shared paranormal urban fantasy series called The Sleepless City, which we've now expanded into an actual world, because we've both got spin-offs taking place in that world. I also write historical, and I'm planning to do a mix of spec fic, historical with a supernatural bent when I've got time. And I've also done some historical with Lou Silver, which is set in 18th century Scotland with a bit of magic in it. And I've also done some sweet romance as well.
So now over to MD Grimm.
So hi, I'm MD Grimm. I write mostly romance, but it runs the gamut from fantasy to sci-fi to paranormal. So most of my books, I realize, actually has some sort of magical or fantasy something in it. And I realize I just can't write like regular contemporary stuff. I love reading it, but for me to write it, I get bored. So I'm like, I need to like pop in fairies or magic or something weird going on. So right now, that's what I write.
I completely get you with not being able to write contemporary, MD. I'm Jillian. My pronouns are she, her. I'm currently in Canterbury in New Zealand, and I write a weird mix of everything. I started off writing paranormal romance with my Thorns and Fangs series, but the more I wrote this, the smaller the romance got, and the twistier and bigger the plot got. This is actually the first in a 4-book series, and they're all massive giants of books. So you can tell the plot really got away from me. You could do serious damage with that book. And then the series of my heart is my Deep Magic series, which is kind of mythological folklore. I can't call it urban fantasy because it's contemporary, but urban fantasy is fast-paced, and this is set in rural North Wales, and it's very slow, and it's kind of got a dreamy fantasy feeling. If you've read Susan Cooper's Dark is Rising series, that was a major influence on the series. But what I've kind of fallen into most recently is Gothic romance. This was completely unplanned. I wrote The Secretary and the Ghost as a break between serious urban fantasy that was going to go mainstream, and instead this little book is now a 14-book series, and it doesn't seem to be slowing down soon. It is ridiculous, tropey, Gothic nonsense, but every book in the series, they're all standalones, which means that they've all got something going on. So The Secretary and the Ghost, ghost story, vampires relic, sort of vampires in the vein of Dracula and all that nonsense. So yeah, it's really freeing because it allows me to play with all sorts of things that I find interesting. So sort of speaking about things that we find interesting and enjoy playing with, how does magic work in your worlds? Because I'm sure that our magical systems, even though we may write sort of vaguely similar things, our magic and how we approach it is going to be completely different. So let's keep the order that we've got going on, and let's start with Elizabeth.
I have 2 types of magic throughout 3 different series. And Sentries and the Sleepless City, I use what I refer to as traditional magic or real magic. It's what actually Wiccans practice, and they use incantations and runes and oils and spices and other things. And anybody can learn this. You don't have to be born with the ability to have the magic. You just have to believe that it will work. I try to stay with actual Wiccan beliefs because that is something that can actually be looked up and researched, and I don't want people to call me out on it. You can use anything like silver or sacrosanct oil or meteoritic iron. Those have all been documented as used for different types of magic. And in both the series, I have supernatural creatures that have their own magical powers. And again, I stay with what the powers, what the myths present those powers to be. The 3rd series is El Corazon, and right now it's a series of 1 because I've only gotten 1 book out. And that one, I have human beings that are referred to as magicals, and it's a certain percentage of the population that are born with some sort of magical power, but they're limited. The first book is Scintilla, and a scintilla is a small electrical charge. So Brandon, one of the main characters in the book, he can manipulate his own electrical field. He can maybe jumpstart your car, but he can't light up a whole city type of thing. And because of what he can do with electricity, he's got some special skills in education and training. But that's the only kind of magical ability he has. There are other people that have magic related to sound or light or air, but they're limited with that element to use.
Before we hop over to Anne, I have to say I'm fascinated by the idea of someone whose magic is limited to sound or air. How does that work?
I haven't written those books yet. So I'm not quite sure. In Scintilla, the magic is the electricity, and he can project his electrical field. We all have an electrical field. That's a real thing with human beings. Human beings also make sound. We live in air, and I think the other one I have is light. And they're just he projects his field, and you can also kind of use it during sex too. So
Fun times.
yeah,
I look forward to reading those books when they come out.
I haven't gotten into the nitty-gritty of the sound and the air and the light yet.
Well, we have that to look forward to. Anne, your turn.
Right. I'm in the process of repubbing my backlist, so a lot of what I've written isn't actually out there. That's the old cover, because they haven't put the new one out yet. The other thing that we've got in the Sleepless City is we've got soul bombs. So when a vampire and I'd say another vampire or a human or whatever get together, there's a bond so they can sort of feel when each other's in trouble and stuff like that. So in my stories in the Sleepless City, I've got a human and a vampire, and also a vampire and a werewolf, where Elizabeth's got 2 vampires. So it's with each different iteration, it's slightly different. So her guys, they can feel a lot more. It's almost like telepathy. With mine, it's more of a feeling empathic type of thing. I sort of go into more of what the vampire and human thing is, because I've got the first in a spin-off series for Simon and Ben coming out later in the year, in a Wellington set series called Paniki Shadows. And Paniki is the old Maori word for Port Nicholson, which is Wellington. So I sort of wanted to fit that in as well. And the other thing I've got coming out, which is also set in the same world, is the first of my Kiwi Sci series, and that series name kind of says it all. I've always been fascinated by psychic powers, so a lot of the magic elements are tied to that. In my fantasy series, which is Hidden Places and Dragons of Astria, which are hopefully coming back out next year, they're tied into that, but because it's fantasy, they're called talents rather than psi powers. And there's a bit of elemental magic going to play a huge part in the Dragon series as well.
That sounds awesome fun. Panelists, I've just thought of something. If we mention a book or series, can you drop the link to it into the chat? Because we had this problem with the readings last night. People were talking about the books and I was like, oh my gosh, I need to find this and read this. But everything sort of moved so quickly that I couldn't quite keep up. So if you just, while I'm talking to other people, throw your links in there. That would be awesome.
Machine without my links, so I'll just put my website in there and everything's on there. So that's
good.
The way to go.
Yep. Okay, MD, it's your turn. How does your magic work?
So I kind of can't. I have so many series. I have 4 series going on, which I don't recommend for anyone to do. And each of them has like their own way of doing things because I can't seem to settle on my favorite way of doing magic. So the one that's most prevalent with the magic is my Stones of Power series. And it's set in an alternate fantasy world. And so then I have mages, and mages are like offshoots of humanoid creatures that I created called Seelas, but they're basically humans. They're just pretty mundane, but mages are born from them because mages themselves are sterile. They cannot reproduce. And it's because they have the magic of the mother, capital M, their creator deity inside them. So it's like, it's a trade-off. When you're born a mage, you got the power of creation, but you can't actually like reproduce. So for that, I wrote it back like the first book was like in 2012, I think. And during that time, I got into fitness, into exercise, because I really needed to become healthier. And so I realized that influenced the way I looked at magic in that world, which is you have to keep exercising it or it grows flabby. And so I had, so everyone, like with exercise, everyone has their own metabolism, metabolic, like some people can become weightlifters, some people are just good at running or sprinting, or so I made that my mages each have their own strengths and their own levels of strengths, and even though some of them might exercise more than others, they still can only reach a certain pinnacle. So so that's kind of how I did it, where there's quote unquote weak mages, but they're not weak, they're just strong in a different way. So I have some that are more towards healing and nurturing, others are more warriors, other are adventurers, leaders, that kind of thing, or creators of weird like gargoyle sentient creatures, which my main character creates because, why not? So that's that magic in that story. But then I also have my paranormal shapeshifters, the Shifter Chronicles, which I'm republishing all of them this year, republishing. So for that one, I have different, but there's the shifters, which of course for me are magical creatures because they can shapeshift. But then I also have humans with certain DNA from way back ancestors, which I call the Fae. And so then some of them have manifested abilities. And so then they can either control some natural elements. So some are good with water, fire, strength, that kind of thing. So then, and then I just have humans. So I have like 3 different types of sentient people, but they're all kind of weirdly related in the bigger family tree. And then even in my Saga of the Bull People, which is my sci-fi, there's only 2 books out right now. That one also has science-y magic, I guess you could say, because I just can't get away from magic, even in sci-fi. But it's more of, I try to base it more in science and more in the idea of energy and the way that, a star will explode in energy, but then all that stuff can actually create something else. So we're all interconnected. The string theory, I just kind of think of that. We're all interconnected. So then if you can tap into that, then you can start to manipulate things in yourself and around you. So I try to base that more in science. kind of all over the place.
I love that. Like, flabby magic is what stood out to me to most, but I'm really sad that Michael can't join us now, because Michael wrote, well, the series that he was reading from last night was future dystopia inspired by Raymond Chandler, but with also like melding sci-fi and magic, and it sounded like so much fun. So it's a real shame that Michael's not here to contribute to this conversation. So my turn. So in the Thorn, well, I am really big on the classics. I was an English literature major. I did Victorian literature. Yeah, it messes you up for life, doesn't it? And so I love kind of, the first time I read Dracula, I couldn't get into it. It took me, I think, 3 or 4 times to kind of actually manage to finish it. But once I got it, I loved it. And then I read Camilla like years before, and Camilla especially had an amazing impact on me. So in Thorns and Fangs, I knew I wanted to have like the classic vampire, where vampires are dangerous and you kind of don't want to get involved with one. So that actually ended up sort of underpinning the magic of the world. This story is mostly about necromancers and vampires, which use primarily blood magic. Sort of the most powerful magic in this world is the ones that kind of comes from blood, from sex, from tears, from sweat, like big emotions and the stuff that gives you life. And it's kind of, necromancers and vampires both like take that blood and corrupt it. So they're super powerful, but for the wrong reasons, which that was lots of fun to play with. My main character in the series is an escort, so he's all about sex, which actually kind of gives him a way to manipulate back, if that makes sense. It also turns out, much to his surprise, that he's not as human as he thought he was, so that's fun for him. Deep Magic, which is the Darkers Rising inspired series, and I love how many Will and Van shippers are showing up in the comments. It's making me very happy. This one is about storytelling. In this book, the first book, Ollie discovers he's a witch, and he was one of those kids who was always making up stories as a child. And it turns out that his stories had a habit of coming true, and he didn't actually realize that this is because his nan was a cunning woman and he is a witch. And so now Deep Magic is Ollie kind of negotiating his past and the mistakes he made, and trying to figure out what is real and what isn't, and trying to sort of come to terms with his power. And also, find the fairy tale prince that he invented as a kid and who may or may not be real and still pining for him. So that's fun. It's really hard to talk about the magic underpinning the Read by Candlelight series, which is my Gothic novellas, because it's different in every book, because every book plays with a different paranormal element. We have got ghosts, poltergeists, which, yes, still ghosts. We have demons in one book. We have werewolves, which are a recurring theme. We've got the fae, Selkies, but wherever I've used these, I kind of try to stick closely as possible to kind of like the classic tropes. There's only one book in the series so far where I have deviated and come up with my own original sort of monster, I guess. And that was actually inspired by the phenomenon of bog people, which I don't want to go into it. That would totally ruin the vibe of our nice, friendly panel. But if you're interested and you've got a strong stomach, Google bog people. So we're on to our next question. In your writing, is magic learned or inherent? And what, if any, role does queerness play in magic in your world? So once again, we're throwing it over to Elizabeth.
Most of the times it's learned because, again, I use Wiccan-based magic. Only in Scintilla is it inherited. And for queerness, that doesn't play a role in my books, in any kind of magic. I tend to write stories where the character isn't defined by the fact that they're queer. That's just one aspect of the person, and they just happen to be somebody who's queer and also, a detective or a vampire or a vampire detective or whatever the character is. So I like to think of a world where being queer isn't really something that defines you or is a big deal. So I don't make it a big deal in my books, in any of them.
Okay, Anne,
Pretty
what
much,
about...
Yeah, pretty much what Elizabeth has said. I sort of want a world where queerness is just, hey, this is who I am, rather than it's a big issue in the box as well. The only way would be sort of the romance is MM, but I mean, that's just romance, It's not that it's MM that is the thing. It's just two people falling in love. Short and sweet.
Awesome. Yeah, no, short and sweet is good. I think this hour is going to go by very quickly. MD.
So I have a little bit of a mixed bag with the inherited versus learned. So with my mages, obviously they're born with magic, but they do have to learn how to use it. They can easily get it out of control and it kind of grows with them. So I think I made it where they only get it at puberty. So it's like, you don't know you're a mage until suddenly you lift the house off the ground with your mind, and then it's like, oh crap, you're a mage. And the same, so with that it's inherited, but I also have sorcerers. So for them, that's the category of they stole a magical object and are using that magic to usually cause destruction because they haven't learned discipline. They haven't learned how to control themselves. They let it go to their heads. So that's why it's called the Stones of Power, because I have stones of power that are based off the birthstones. And so they're scattered all over the place. So if someone grabs that, just a regular person or whatever creature I created in that world grabs it up, they can be like, I can rule the world now because I have this stone. And it's like, crap. So, but then with my shifters, of course, that's inherited. And then with the people with the Fae DNA, that's inherited, but yet they still, again, have to learn how to use it. So I kind of have a yes, but kind of thing. And then with my sci-fi, that's absolutely learned. You're not born with it unless you're part of this mysterious alien species that they are just one with the universe kind of thing. If you go like learn with them and they teach you, you might pick up something from them, you might not. So for that, it's definitely learned. If you're a human, it's absolutely learned. And as for the queerness, I'm kind of with Elizabeth and Anne with it just kind of is. It's not really it's part of what they are, but it's not who they are. So with my Stones of Power, since it's an alternate planet, I can just do what I want. And so I just don't have those definitions. Most of my characters are bi or pan. So it's, and that's just the way they are. Shifters, the same thing, because in the rest of the animal kingdom, it's not a thing. And then with my sci-fi, Saga of the Bull People, since I have alien species, again, I can create different societies where it's not a thing, or they have different interpretations of what's normal because they're alien species. So I get to play with my toys and, you know, do what I want with them. So
that sounds like so much fun. I've got a feeling we'll be coming back to that later with one of our future questions. It's a shame that Michael isn't here because I think that he uses queerness in a really interesting way in relationship to the magic in his work. So if that's something that interests you, definitely check out Michael's work. For me, I think though it is sort of different across series, as has been the case with the other panelists, I think one of the big themes of my work is found family. So I'm usually focusing on a group who have come together by chance and formed friendships and chosen to be together, which means that you don't often get to see that line of inheritance. Having said that though, the Deep Magic series, Ollie's fairy tale prince is a Morganau, which is a Welsh water spirit, and other Morganau have abilities that humans do not. So that's been fun to play with. Nate has a twin brother who they've both got sort of supernatural elements about them that they came about through their birth, but that is kind of not a huge focus. So it's kind of the sort of theme of my stories is about identity and people accepting who they are and realizing that they are most powerful when they are in tune with their inner truths. So it's not necessarily about sort of talent versus innate talent versus like learned skills so much as embracing your full potential by loving yourself. So I hope that makes sense. We've got a really cool question in the chat that I think we're going to answer next. This comes from Lloyd Meeker, and he says that in a recent presentation, David Farland made the comment that for any system of magic must have a cost. He's not a fan of this belief, although he does understand that the practice of magic involves the expenditure of force. And he says that in his most recent book, he contrasts two systems of magic, one that is spell-based exercise of will, which he calls rote magic, the other which draws on the balance and forces of nature. So how do we see the cost of magic or the source of the power of the magic that our practitioners call on? So I think this kind of relates to how we make magic seem real in our worlds. So Elizabeth, I kind of feel like I'm throwing you a curveball here, but do your best.
Well, the Wiccan-based magic, Wicca teaches you that for every action, there's a reaction. There's the power of three, but what you send out into the universe as magic comes back to you. So it's not necessarily a repercussion, but it's limited. And in Scintilla, that I use inherited magic, they're not all powerful. They have limitations. They have not necessarily, again, they don't suffer from it, but they can't do everything. And if you send out a certain amount of electricity, you have to recharge, just like a battery has to recharge. So yeah, I basically go by the my kitty's cute. That's Oscar. I've only had him for a couple of weeks.
I've noticed you've got a very cute dog as well that's been coming and going.
Yeah, that's Finn.
He is lovely.
Thank you. That's his superpower. He's cute. That's his magic.
So Anne, how is Kaylee today?
Katie's disappeared into the bedroom. She was mooning around and making lots of noise before we started, but she's decided the last panel I did, she turned up. So yeah. Consequences of magic, cost of magic. I'm a big believer in consequences, that it's not a free ride. So in most of my books, if someone uses a lot of magic, they're going to feel really tired afterwards. It's not, and there's got to be a limit on what they can do as well. We haven't made our vampires very, they can do anything or whatever. There is limitations, because if you've got an all-powerful being, I think you're setting yourself up for problems further down the line. And I realised in the last question, because I'm a bit nervous today and I'm tired. This is my Saturday, so I've had a really long week. I didn't really focus on the learned inherent as well. So that sort of comes down with the energy levels and the constant and the constant consequences as well, especially with the books I'm still trying to get out there. Like with the dragons and the elemental, they're still learning their way around that, because one of the main characters has only just realized, hey, look, I can shapeshift into a dragon. Oh shit, what does this mean? So he's not, he's making mistakes along the way, and then feeling really tired because he's overdone it and stuff like that. So yeah, I think there's got to be constant consequences, because, and also I like flawed characters, because I think perfect characters are quite boring. So that sort of runs into that as well. Yeah.
Very cool. MD.
So I'm just going to focus on my stones of power, because that's the one that's most magic heavy. So for that one, there definitely is limitations. Again, like Anne said, it's boring if they're like good at everything. It's like, how can I relate to that? I'm bad at everything. So with my main character, Morgoth, he is very powerful. And in some ways, he's very much afraid of how powerful he is because of reasons. And so a lot of the ways he's held himself back. But I show that if you do that, if you let yourself grow flabby with the magic, then you can hurt yourself almost more than you hurt anyone else. Like if you haven't weightlifted in a while and you try like 50 pounds, you're going to pull a muscle and you're going to like hate yourself later. So I have that where that's the magic. If you try something really big after being flabby for a while, you're going to pull something inside you. So that's the cause and effect of it. So you have to keep exercising, you have to keep pushing yourself. You can't plateau. You have to keep trying to get to that pinnacle where you are. And for him, he realizes he works for what he has, but he keeps getting higher, and he's like, where is my pinnacle? This is getting creepy. Like, where is this? And so for him also, it's balance of the soul. So if he's imbalanced, then he's also off kilter, and he can hurt himself, or he can hurt those he loves. So yeah, so I have it, a lot of it is internal with him, not so much external. But yet, and also with the magic system, I have internal force that you can draw on to make magic happen. But you can also draw on the magic in the surrounding area, in the environment, because the mother put magic everywhere. It's in all things, because she created everything. So he can draw. He learns how to draw on things to sustain himself. So he doesn't have to use just what he has, which also, and then he can mingle it and everything. So yeah, it's fun making a mage pull a muscle, an internal muscle, and be like, oh, that was too big, I shouldn't have done that.
I am really loving the sort of weightlifting magic analogy that you've got going on. I'm going to have to track down this series afterwards. So so for me, I want there to be limitations and rules to whatever magical system I'm using, kind of logic. I want there to be an internal logic with that magic so that it seems more real to my reader. I kind of think that, oh my gosh, yes. Ray has just said in the chat that conversation is reminding her of Tamora Pierce's Tortale series, where the magic users and wild mages will overextend themselves and pass out. I knew there was something that reminded me of, and it was kind of just on the edge of my awareness. Thank you, Ray. Yes. I'm sorry. Okay, so yeah, so for me, having costs and consequences, and I kind of, I'd have to disagree with you, Lloyd, and say that I think there's not such a big difference between them for me that, but for example, in Thorns and Fangs, if you've got a vampire using blood magic to control someone, obviously that makes the vampire very powerful. But if somebody else gains control of that person, the vampire is now vulnerable. So it's a huge amount of power, but if you're careless, that can be wielded against you. So it's kind of, when you gain power, you also become vulnerable to manipulation. Okay, sorry about that. I got a text message. What was I going to say? So the Deep Magic and the Gothic Romance series, there's no real sort of more obvious sort of cost consequences in those series. So for our next question, we've actually got 2 questions in the Q&A that are that approach the subject of mythology, and I think they are both brilliant questions. So I'm going to suggest that we try and combine both of them. So Ray has asked, for all the panelists, do you ever get inspired by folklore mythology that is typically told heteronormatively and take it and queer it? And Jed has asked, when you use mythological or folklore elements, how important is it to you to depict them faithfully versus defying expectations? Aren't those great questions? So Elizabeth, over to you.
For the mythology and folklore elements, I've taken what exists and I give it my own spin on it. There's some things that I just didn't like. I think Anne felt the same way. You know, we wanted our vampires to be able to walk around in the daylight. Our werewolves were born, not made. I did the same thing in Scintilla. The werewolf was born, not made. In Centuries, I kind of flat out made some stuff up, because Centuries it takes place on this world, but in 300 years in the future, so I could just do anything I wanted. And but I still used the basics of mythology. I just created my own monsters that did what I needed them to do, if that makes sense.
That sounds good to me. Anne.
Yeah, so we did flip a few things in the Sleepless City with the vampires. As Elizabeth said, ours can walk in daylight, though the younger vampires tend to wear dark glasses when they're out because the sunlight hurts their eyes. So that's a good way to spot a vampire. We also didn't want people just running around turning everybody. So vampires are only contagious on the anniversary of when they were turned. And it depends on the age of how long their vampires they are contagious for. Like my vampire Simon, he's just over 100 because he was turned in the Battle of the Somme. So he's contagious for probably about a week. Where Forge and Declan, who are much older, they're contagious for a lot longer. So it's sort of all worked out on that as well. And some of the things we've had where the vampires have deliberately let the mythology out there because humans tend to be afraid of anything that's other. If humans believe they can't walk in sunlight, well, that sort of protects the vampires a bit as well. So we sort of went with some things were the same and some were different, like our vampires don't reflect in mirrors, but they can under certain circumstances, and we had a bit of fun with that. And garlic doesn't affect them, might give them a bit of a stomach upset if they don't like it. And vampires have still got allergies and things like that. They can be affected by, say, if someone puts a poison into blood, or they might have certain things they're allergic to and have a reaction to. And a lot of the mythology is actually, the vampires encourage it because it keeps them safe and their community safe as well, if there's a few misconceptions out there.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense to me. MD.
So I am a humongous fan of different mythologies and folklore. It's kind of a problem. So I collect how, mythologies have, the creations of the world and the creations of different creatures and the folklore and how weird some of the folklore can really be, especially about vampires. Just specifically, it's amazing how many different cultures have some really weird ideas of vampires. So my tendency is to take all that I love about mythology and create my own, like over create my own. So like with the Stones of Power, I wrote a song that you can technically sing about the creation of the world and how the mother created everything. So I definitely take from bits and pieces from everything and just go, okay, that's what I want to do. I hope to use more folklore and more like fairy tales and twist them up. I have this really, I've been itching to do a story about Red Riding Hood, but making it looped in with Fenrir from the Norse mythology, the big ass wolf that eats Odin at Ragnarok. Like I really want to do something and combine those two tales in some way. So, so I haven't yet done the queering yet, but I do have plans on wanting to take that. I'm just kind of still, I have 4 series going on right now and I need to finish at least like 1 so before I really start on any other big project. But I do have a standalone vampire novel that I re-released this past week on Tuesday, actually, Eye of the Beholder. And I do go with the more classic idea of vampires, well, classic, like Dracula classic, which is the, daylight's bad for them, they like nighttime. But then I also put my own twist on ages and how, like, my main character is a human and he's only met vampires to a certain age and he doesn't know what happened. He's never met anyone like more than like 200 years old. And he is always curious about that, but it's one of those tightly held secrets of why he's never met like an ancient vampire, and he eventually learns why. So, I always like taking the classics and then like putting your own twist on it, making your own stamp and be like, there it is. I just added my own thing to it.
Yep. MD, you have an offer to beta read your cross between Red Riding Hood and Fenrir in the chat. So for me, in addition to being an English major, I also did classical studies. So I'm big, or at least I was really big on Greek and Roman mythology, which is gay AF. So I have no compunctions queering mythology because I suspect that a lot of the folktales we have today were originally queer and have been altered to fit kind of medieval Christian sensibilities. And so the only compunctions I have an urban fantasy series that is sitting on my computer, I've got a full draft of one book and 3/4 finished draft of a second book because it deals with Maori mythology. The Maori are the indigenous people of New Zealand. I am not Maori, so I'm very hesitant. Like, I want to write and celebrate those stories, those mythological elements, but I also want to do it in a way that is respectful and right. And right now, I don't believe that I have the knowledge, the tools, and the self-awareness to do it justice. So those books are going to stay parked on my computer for a while until I have, you know, those skills needed. Now we are, oh Lloyd, I'm so pleased. Classical studies for the win. So we are rapidly running out of time. So our very, very rapidly, we're going to do the last two questions. What author's magic systems inspired your own? Okay.
I don't think anybody's, because again, I use Wiccan basically, so most of the stuff that I've read had the other kind of magic where you're born with it and you can throw the little fireballs, and so I stuck with Wiccan magic.
Yep. Anne.
I've read such a lot of urban fantasy and fantasy, I'm not sure I could actually pin down an author that has. I've got people that I've read that I love. Darkest Rising, big up there with me as well. So yeah, I think I've sort of got ideas and go, oh, that's cool, but put a spin on it as well. So yeah.
Awesome. MD?
So again, kind of everything that I read, but the one that jumps out most is the Dresden Files by Jim Butcher, mostly because of the way he explains his magic system and he grounds it in physics. And so that's kind of what made me think of my exercise idea, is grounding my magic in something that I can understand, which is exercising, which is bodily, you know, what happens to your body if you overextend. So that inspired me to try to ground it.
Awesome. For me, Susan Cooper and Margaret Mayhew, who is a underrated New Zealand author that you should all be reading, in particular, The Changeover. Okay, our last question. Do each of you write more light, humorous, or dark, heavy? I write light, humorous, and dark, heavy, often in the same book. It's a mess. Elizabeth?
I do the same as well, and there's certain things about vampires that just screamed for something funny. We have one scene where the youngest vampire is about to go into somebody's house, and everybody forgets that he has to be invited in, so he runs into this invisible wall and then is bounced back off the porch and lands on his butt on the sidewalk. And sometimes you just have to do that kind of stuff.
Anne?
Yeah, I'll be the same, the mix of dark and light, because I mean, I like being nasty to the characters, but at the same time, you've got to have a bit of humour in there as well, or it's just a wee bit too much. I mean, I read for escapism, so I kind of want to write the same way.
Yep, and MD?
Yeah, most of my stuff is actually dark. I'm getting darker and I need to stop, but I do try to interject humor, lightness, but I'm not the best with humor, so I'm trying to flex my own muscles, trying to get that wit, that sarcasm, the stuff that makes me laugh, like try to duplicate that. So I'm trying, but I'm just better at dark.
Awesome. Oh, this has been just so much fun. Thank you all for giving us your time today and talking about your writing, and the audience. Thank you so much for your wonderful questions. It has been absolutely fabulous. Thank you.